I'm Todd Myers, Vice President for Research at the Washington Policy Center, and I'm filling in for Paul Guppy this week with the legislative review. So there is just over a week left in the legislative session. And to keep up with what's going on, make sure to like and share this video and also subscribe to Washington Policy Center's YouTube channel. It is a great way to keep up on top of what's going on in the legislature and how it will affect your pocketbook and your family. So, as we head to the last week of the session, the focus is turning more on budget and taxes to pay for the big spending increase that is included in those proposed budgets. So, earlier this week, I joined TVW to talk about one of those proposals, which would lift the cap, the 1% limit on property tax increases. Senate Bill 2798 would allow an increase of 1% plus population growth and inflation. Now, supporters argue that this is necessary to pay for a range of increasing expenses. But under current law, local jurisdictions like counties can already increase those taxes above that if they go to the voters. What this law would do is allow local jurisdictions to increase property taxes without having to ask the voters' permission. We think that if the voters want to increase taxes for important expenditures, they can do that. But simply bypassing them and taking more and more of their taxes, especially at a time when taxes have gone up so much and are proposed to go up even more in lots of other areas, it doesn't make any sense. The voters should be asked, and they should go to the voters and make their case about why the spending is necessary. The legislature is also hearing many bills that we've highlighted in the past that would raise taxes, including increasing taxes on businesses, on innovators, on capital gains, on the estate tax, and a bill to increase the state gas tax by about 6 cents per gallon. Washington already has about the third highest gas taxes in the country. This would keep us there, but it would be a big increase, far and above what most other states are charging. All of these proposals are in play right now and being considered while the House and Senate are working behind closed doors to develop a final version of their budget and the taxes that will be included with that budget. So we're going to track those bills this week in the final days of the regular session. But before then, make sure to go to washingtonpolicy.org and sign our No New Taxes petition. We want to encourage Governor Ferguson to sign a budget that doesn't increase Washington's already high taxes. Now, there's some good news in that this week the governor released a statement noting that, quote, raising $12 billion in taxes is unsustainable, too risky, and fails to adequately prepare Washington state for any economic crisis that occurred in the future. That's great. We want him to go even farther and commit to a no new taxes pledge. So go to washingtonpolicy.org and sign our no new taxes pledge that we will deliver to him next week. Now, as we've noted, Washington doesn't need new taxes and should focus on cutting the huge amount of waste that's already in the budget rather than adopting taxes that punish innovation and make life more difficult for Washington families. We've released a series of videos showing ways that we could cut waste. You can go to washingtonpolicy.org and look for the No New Taxes pledge. Another new tax bill that was introduced this week would punish Tesla for, ironically, selling too many electric vehicles. Washington law requires car manufacturers to sell a certain percentage of their cars as electric vehicles. Next year, that's 35%. Now, car manufacturers like Honda that don't meet those targets can purchase credits from companies like Tesla that have a surplus. Now, the legislature is mad that Tesla has done too good a job of following the state law. More than half of the credits that are available for sale are owned by Tesla. So Senate Bills 5811 and House Bill 2077 would tax the sale of those credits and only the credits by companies that have more than 25,000 credits in bank that are called banked. Only Tesla meets that definition. So the legislation includes perhaps the best description of the legislative mindset in Olympia that I've ever seen. It says, quote, it is the intent of the legislature to address this unintended outcome by taxing windfall profits. So, in other words, they admit that they screwed up the original bill, but now want to pass another bill to fix the mess that they created. And the best solution in their mind is more taxes. If that doesn't perfectly describe how they think in Olympia, I don't know what does. Really, the only thing that Tesla is guilty of is doing a better job of selling electric vehicles than its competitors. But if this is an unintended consequences, why would we trust the same legislators who screwed up the law in the first place just a few years ago now to suddenly fix it? Look, this bill is clearly intended to punish Tesla because legislators are simply mad at Elon Musk. So, turning away from taxes, there's some good news this week. Two good bills for workers were adopted and signed this week. One was signed by the governor, one was adopted by the legislature. House Bill 1023, which allows Washington to join a cosmetology compact with other states, was adopted and is now headed to the governor's desk. This would allow those with a cosmetology license in one of the other participating states to practice in Washington state. Now, this is very helpful for people who move to Washington, like military spouses who are transferred to Washington bases. They can bring their skills to our state and earn a living without having to start the entire onerous licensing process over again. Now, we have long argued and continue to argue that the best approach is simply to recognize other states' licenses without the needless bureaucracy of joining a state compact. Washington should welcome people who have skills and licenses, and licenses are very similar in other states anyway. But this is a step in the right direction. Also, Governor Ferguson signed House Bill 1114, which creates a compact for respiratory therapists. So this will increase the number of healthcare workers in Washington state and will reduce the likelihood of shortages. So two good bills that were passed this week with regard to workers' rights. On the other hand, Senate Bill 5041 would allow voluntarily striking workers to use the state's unemployment fund to pay them while they strike. And that was also adopted this week. Worker rights director Elizabeth New of the Washington Policy Center has a great editorial on the danger of this bill in the Spokane Spokesman Review. She notes that striking workers would be able to collect unemployment benefits for somewhere between 4 and 12 weeks. That's still being worked out. But the bill would even allow public employees, like teachers, to collect benefits while striking, even though the law prohibits them from striking. So this bill will encourage more strikes, and it has the potential to hurt far more people than it helps. Elizabeth also highlights Senate Bill 5292, which is waiting for a vote in the state house. Now, it would dramatically increase the payroll tax for paid family medical leave. When that law was adopted, the tax was set at 40 cents per every $100 of earnings. This new bill would raise the tax to triple that level and increase it gradually to $2 per 100 by 2023, 5 times the original tax level. As Elizabeth has pointed out repeatedly, this program is sold on helping working families, but really it primarily benefits wealthier families. Two bad education bills were also passed this week. House Bill 1296 and Senate Bill 5181 repeal parts of the Parents' Bill of Rights, the initiative adopted by the legislature just last year, and both of those were passed this week. Both were amended and must go back to the House of Origin for concurrence. And ironically, some of the people who voted for the Parents' Bill of Rights last year voted against what they voted for last year and voted for these changes this year. Kind of a quick change of heart by some Washington state legislators. Both bills remove notification about medical treatment provided in schools and change the term public school records to education records, which is a narrower set of records that excludes such information as mental health notes. So it makes what parents can have access to, much more narrow. House Bill 1296 also limits parental notification of crimes affecting students to alleged events occurring on school grounds during the school day, which excluded cyber crimes such as stalking and bullying. So the bills overlap, so it is likely that one of the bills will ultimately be adopted and sent to the governor. Now, interestingly, both bills have an emergency clause, which means that the laws take effect immediately. But the real reason that they have an emergency clause is because it makes it more difficult for voters to repeal those laws. Legislation without an emergency clause is subject to a referendum, which allows the voters to just simply vote to either keep or reject a law. And to put a referendum on the ballot requires fewer signatures than an initiative, about half as many signatures. If, however, legislation has an emergency clause, it can only be repealed with an initiative, which takes twice as many signatures. That's why the bills repealing the Parents' Bill of Rights have the emergency clause. They know that the public opposes what they are doing, and given a chance to vote, the people would likely overturn these bad bills. Abuse of emergency clauses is a serious problem this year. It's been a problem for a while, but particularly this year as well. Many bills have unnecessary emergency clauses that are designed primarily to prevent voters from having a say on those bills. So, for example, in addition to the two bills repealing the Parents' Bill of Rights, there are emergency clauses on the Tesla tax bill that I just mentioned, the rent control bill, the increase to the capital gains tax, the closure of 2 schools for those with developmental disabilities. Governor Ferguson has already used his line item veto to remove one unnecessary emergency clause this year, and that is really promising. He should do more of that and give the voters the opportunity to have their say on some of the tax increases and some of these critical policy bills. So this is just one aspect of the efforts in Washington state to block voters from having their say about public policy. Also this week, in a really remarkable decision from the state Supreme Court, a 2023 Spokane initiative that prevented homeless camping within 1,000 feet of public areas, including schools, childcare centers, and parks, was overturned. The court ruled that the issue was an administrative in nature and not a policy matter, and therefore couldn't be addressed by the voters. The dissent in the decision correctly notes that this ruling, quote, effectively eliminates local initiative power, since any city decision can be called administrative rather than policy. You can read more about the decision at Center Square in an editorial written by Chris Cargill of our sister organization, Mountain States Policy Center. Section 1 of the Washington State Constitution says, all political power is inherent in the people, and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and they are established to protect and maintain individual rights. That's the very first section of the state constitution for a reason. And too many elected officials in Olympia, either in the legislature or in the Supreme Court, are forgetting that important fact. So, turning to agriculture this week, we saw one bad bill pass and one that actually makes progress on an issue that faces many in the agriculture community. House Bill 1141 was adopted this week and is waiting for the governor's signature. It would allow cannabis agriculture workers to unionize without a vote and with a minority of their members. This bill was opposed by a bipartisan group of legislators as well as cannabis growers. The concern is that this bill could be extended to other agricultural workers. Our agriculture director, Pam Lewison, has a really good blog explaining about the risk that this apparently limited bill poses to all of agriculture in Washington state. As our report card for Washington's future notes, farmers and ranchers in Washington are under incredible pressure with increasing costs and growing uncertainty about markets, home and abroad. House Bill 1912, on the other hand, was also adopted, and the state Senate this week, and it actually offers some hope to fix a problem that was created by the state's CO2 tax, known as the Climate Commitment Act. When that law was adopted, it promised to exempt agricultural fuels from the tax. But instead of following the law, the Department of Ecology simply refused to implement it, leaving it to the legislature to find a fix. House Bill 1912, which passed unanimously out of the Senate this week, attempts to do that by creating a list of locations where exempt agricultural fuel can be purchased. It also extends the existing rebate system for farmers to recover taxes that they paid but should not have. So we'll see how well the system works, but it is frustrating that it comes more than 2 years after the law began implementation. So, speaking of climate laws that make gasoline more expensive, the Senate also approved House Bill 1409, which would make the state's low carbon fuel standard more expensive. So, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but as a quick reminder, the law requires fuel distributors to reduce the carbon intensity of fuels using a number of different strategies. The original law, passed just 4 years ago, was already failing to generate the revenue that some governments and foreign oil companies who lobbied for the bill wanted. So the new bill makes the law more expensive, but does nothing to reduce CO2 emissions. And it costs more, but we don't get anything for it. In fact, the new bill also breaks promises to both farmers and workers who were told that they would get jobs and business as a result of this law. Those promises have now been removed from the bill. So what we get is higher prices, but no jobs and no environmental benefit. It's just the latest example of environmental legislation that admits that the promises that they made just years ago were false, increasing prices and not delivering on the promises. George Santayana once said that fanaticism is redoubling your effort when you've lost sight of the goal. And that seems very relevant for many of the climate bills this session. So that's it for this week. We are winding down with just over a week to go left in the session. Again, make sure to like and share this video, subscribe to Washington Policy Center on YouTube, and make sure to visit washingtonpolicy.org for the latest information during this final critical week of the legislative session. Talk to you next week.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.